The entire class at Willowbrook High School erupted into loud laughter when Mr. James Carter, the notorious arrogant advanced math teacher, mockingly handed the chalk to Mrs. Ella Robinson, the older black janitor in their eyes. To them, Ella was simply a janitor, a quiet, humble woman whose calloused hands bore the marks of decades spent cleaning hallways and collecting trash. When Mr. Carter, with a sneer, challenged her to solve the notoriously difficult math problem that loomed on the blackboard, no one expected anything more than for her to lower her head in shame and quietly walk away. However, what happened next left everyone speechless. The laughter abruptly ceased, replaced by utter astonishment. Ella not only walked to the board, but confidently took the chalk, shattering every prejudice and expectation in that room, revealing an extraordinary mathematical talent no one could have imagined. Willowbrook High School, located in the suburbs, was renowned for its high educational standards and the wealth of the white families who lived in the area. However, behind its modern civilized facade lay a darker, colder place where prejudice simmered beneath the surface every day, and Ella Robinson was the victim of that cruel bias. Ella Robinson was an older black woman, her hair curly and streaked with gray, her eyes filled with sorrow, yet always radiating resilience. For nearly 20 years, Ella had worked as a janitor at Willowbrook School, a quiet, simple job that easily made her a target for the racist gazes of those around her. Every day, Ella arrived at the school while it was still dark, sweeping the long, empty hallways, cleaning each classroom, and scrubbing every corner of the stairs. Though she was diligent and dedicated, to many, she was still just an old black woman doing menial work. Students would often walk past her with indifferent, cold stares, sometimes even sneering behind her back, assuming she couldn't hear them. Teachers, though not openly insulting, looked at her with suspicion and avoidance, never offering her a kind word. On some afternoons, when the hallway was quiet, Ella would silently stand by the classroom window, gazing outside and reflecting on her life. She thought back to her youth, to her dream of becoming a renowned mathematician. But the harsh realities of life, a poor family background and the thick wall of societal prejudice, forced her to abandon that bright academic path. Instead, Ella chose to accept a simple life, silently working as a janitor to support her family. The racial discrimination, the contempt she endured daily, gradually turned her inward, resigned, and made her an invisible shadow in the crowded school. Ella aprendió a vivir en silencio, soportando los ojos escrutadores y las sutiles ofensas todos los días, como una suerte que nunca podría ser cambiada. But what Ella didn't know was that life still held unexpected surprises, and a significant event was about to occur that would place her at the center of a pivotal emotional turning point, one that would shake the school and awaken the souls of those who had long been lost in apathy and cruel prejudice. That morning, after finishing her work cleaning the hallways, Ella quietly entered Mr. James Carter's advanced math class to wipe away the chalk dust left on the floor. She always tried to work quickly and quietly so as not to disturb the lesson, but it seemed that her very effort to do so made her an easy target for contemptuous glances and cruel jokes. Mr. James Carter was the renowned math teacher at Willowbrook High School, famous not only for his deep knowledge, but also for his handsome, polished appearance. However, his intelligence and long-standing reputation had fostered an excessive pride, making him believe that no one in the school could surpass his intellect. In particular, Carter maintained a cold, distinctly unwelcoming attitude toward people of color, though he never openly expressed it. When Ella bent down to pick up a crumpled piece of paper right by his feet, Carter suddenly smirked, his eyes gleaming with mischief. A malicious idea flashed through his mind. He wanted to further assert his superiority while making the older black woman feel humiliated in front of the class. "Ella," Carter called loudly, breaking the silence in the room, his sharp, cold eyes fixed on her, a sneer barely visible at the corner of his mouth. "I'm sure you've been eavesdropping on my lessons for a while, haven't you? Why don't you show the class your hidden math skills?" The entire class turned to look at Ella and immediately erupted in snickers at Carter's sarcastic remark. The classroom atmosphere became suffocating in an instant, with the careless laughter blending with the subtle mockery of her skin color, age, and lowly job. A few white students whispered just loudly enough for Ella to clearly hear their malicious words. "She probably doesn't even know what the problem on the board is." Ella stood frozen, her hands gripping the piece of paper tightly in her palm, her heart aching with sharp, painful pangs. Her eyes met Carter's, silently hoping for some sign of sympathy, or at the very least, an apology for the cruel joke. But all she received was a look of enjoyment and challenge, a gleam in his eyes as he reveled in her discomfort. "Don't be embarrassed, Mrs. Ella," Carter continued, raising his voice deliberately, causing the class to laugh even harder. "This problem is pretty tough. Even my best students have struggled with it. But who knows? Maybe you're a hidden genius. Come up here and show us." The tension in the room grew thicker as all eyes fixated on Ella, eagerly anticipating her failure. Ella stood there, a storm of emotions brewing inside her, her eyes welling with tears. But she had never allowed herself to cry in front of those who had always sought to bring her down. With all the pride she had left within her, Ella took a deep breath and decided to walk toward the board. She didn't know what awaited her, but for the first time after years of enduring degrading stares and cruel words, she was determined not to back down. The room fell silent as Ella approached the blackboard. Carter remained with his arms crossed, a self-satisfied expression on his cold face, fully confident that Ella would soon regret daring to take on this impossible challenge. But what he didn't realize was that he himself was about to learn the most profound lesson of his life. As Ella took slow, deliberate steps toward the board, the room seemed to shrink around her, the air growing so thick that she could clearly hear the rapid beat of her own heart. The mocking laughter and scrutinizing gazes remained fixed on her, but now they began to feel distant, faint. In that moment, Ella's mind was suddenly pulled away to another place, another time, a deeply buried memory she had tried to lock away at the bottom of her heart for more than 30 years. Back then, Ella was one of the few outstanding black students in the mathematics department at the prestigious Harvard University. Her exceptional intelligence and ability to solve complex problems quickly made her a standout in the eyes of her professors, but this also inadvertently made her the target of envy, contempt, and racial discrimination from wealthy white students who believed that someone like her didn't belong in such a renowned institution. Ella never forgot the mornings of humiliation when she discovered cruel messages written on her dorm room door. "Go back to where you belong," or "You don't belong at Harvard." She never forgot the time she was isolated by her classmates, ignored during group discussions, or looked down upon by professors when she asked questions, treated as an inconvenience simply because of her skin color and poor background. Though those experiences were painful, Ella endured because she knew she carried the hopes of her entire family, of her parents who had worked tirelessly day and night so that their daughter could have a proper education. However, life sometimes proves harsher than one expects. One day, Ella's mother suffered a serious illness, and her already struggling family was pushed into even greater financial hardship. The weight of financial pressure and life's challenges fell heavily on the young student's fragile shoulders, forcing her to make the most heart-wrenching decision of her life, to give up her dream of becoming a renowned mathematician. The day she left Harvard University, Ella clearly remembered standing for a long time at the school's gate, tears streaming down her young face, full of longing. She promised herself that one day she would return to that passion, but life, as it often does, wasn't that simple. Time passed too quickly, and the burdens of daily life and societal prejudice submerged all her small hopes. Ella aceptó trabajos de labor manual, escondiendo su talento matemático extraordinario, como un secreto que nunca sería revelado. 30 years passed in silence and endurance. Ella thought she had become accustomed to the looks of prejudice, the mocking words because of her skin color and humble job. But now, standing in front of the blackboard in Mr. Carter's classroom, all the old wounds throbbed painfully again. That memory burned through her soul, making her ask herself, why does life always force us to step back? But just when Ella felt she might collapse again under the weight of prejudice, something powerful within her suddenly awakened, a resolve stronger than ever before. Today, she would not stay silent. She would not endure any more humiliation. It was time for Ella Robinson to prove to everyone in this room that she deserved respect, not just because of her skin color or her job, but because of her intellect and her dignity. Those bitter memories suddenly quieted in Ella's mind, like a fierce wave that had just passed, leaving an unusual calm behind. She stood there before the large blackboard, covered with mathematical symbols that she hadn't touched in years. The eyes that had been fixed on her no longer made her feel fear or shame. Instead, a new strength began to rise powerfully in her heart, urging Ella to do what she had avoided for over 30 years. She turned around, her gaze steady as she looked directly at Mr. Carter. His cold eyes were still watching her closely, his face full of mockery, as if he were waiting for her to falter and fail in front of the entire class. But today, she would not allow him or anyone else to belittle her again. The air in the classroom seemed to freeze as Ella picked up the white chalk. The whispers and chuckles from the students that had filled the room earlier fell silent, replaced by curiosity mixed with doubt. Their eyes seemed to wonder, could an old janitor who had quietly spent years cleaning possibly do anything with the daunting problem on the board? In that breathless moment of silence, Ella raised her hand to the board. The chalk made a sharp, decisive sound as it hit the surface, a sound like a bell signaling that from this point on, nothing would ever be the same. The complex mathematical symbols suddenly became clear before her, and every logical thought that she had thought was buried deep for 3 decades began to awaken in a miraculous way. Behind Ella, Mr. Carter's self-satisfied smile began to fade. The mocking and arrogant look on his face slowly gave way to confusion and doubt. He had never thought that the woman before him, whom he had always looked down on and mocked, both unintentionally and deliberately, would dare to step up and challenge him with such confident defiance. A flash of worry crossed his mind, but it was quickly buried by his own arrogance. The class remained completely silent, tense, watching every movement Ella made on the board. No one spoke a word, only their eyes were fixed on the firm strokes of chalk she was writing. Ella escribió como si nunca hubiera estado lejos de estas ecuaciones, estos símbolos. Every number, every calculation was shockingly precise, as if her brilliant memory and mathematical ability had never been dulled by time or prejudice. The more Ella wrote, faster, more precisely, the greater the tension in the classroom. The curiosity of the students had now turned into astonishment, doubt, and then into awe. But Ella paid no attention to them. In this moment, her mind was completely immersed in each symbol, each formula, where she once again found herself free and strong, just like the ambitious young student she had once been. And in the moment when the chalk finally stopped on the blackboard, the entire room fell into absolute astonishment. Ella slowly set the chalk down, turned, and looked directly into the eyes of Mr. Carter, whose arrogance had vanished. Gently but firmly, she said, "This is the solution you were looking for." Her words rang out like a clear and powerful declaration, affirming that she was no longer the invisible, submissive janitor in their eyes. Today, for the first time in years of silence, Ella Robinson had decided to stand up against prejudice and show everyone the true value she had always carried within her. The words Ella had just spoken resonated clearly in the suffocating silence of the room. The entire class, along with Mr. Carter, was immersed in a state of astonishment and doubt at what they had just witnessed. No one dared to utter a single word, as if even the slightest breath could shatter the miraculous and tense moment. Ella gently turned back around, her gaze returning to the blackboard. She knew well that at this moment, words alone were not enough to truly change the deep-seated prejudice in the minds of those before her. She needed to prove her actual capabilities, and the white chalk in her hand moved again, stronger and more decisively than ever before. The mathematical symbols appeared clearly, with every minute detail laid out in order. Ella moved without hesitation, her hand flowing as if the complex numbers and formulas were a natural part of herself. Every stroke of chalk she made on the board radiated a sharp logic, intelligence, and fluidity that was so astonishing that no one could take their eyes off her. Behind her, the class's amazement only grew. The students who had once looked down on Ella now sat frozen, their eyes wide open as they focused intently on every chalk line on the board. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to disbelief, and finally to an unmistakable admiration. Even the top students in Mr. Carter's class, those who prided themselves on their superior mathematical abilities, had not been able to solve the problem that Ella was now solving with ease. In the corner of the room, Mr. Carter stood frozen, his eyes glued to every stroke Ella made, with increasing panic. The self-confidence and smugness that had once defined him evaporated quickly, leaving behind a pale face filled with embarrassment. The sharp mathematical lines on the board seemed like small cuts, piercing deeply into the pride he had built upon prejudice and the contempt he had shown toward others for so many years. When the final chalk mark was made, Ella took a small step back, her eyes fixed on the completed problem. The answer was clear, clean, and flawlessly accurate. No one in the classroom, not even Carter, could find a single mistake in the brilliant solution Ella had just presented. The classroom remained in absolute silence for a few more seconds before soft murmurs began to appear in the back rows. But this time, the sounds were not mocking laughter or cruel words. They were genuine astonishment mixed with sincere admiration. "No way, she really did it. It's unbelievable. Mrs. Ella solved the problem even we gave up on," one student whispered, their voice tinged with awe. Mr. Carter still didn't speak, standing frozen with his eyes fixed on the blackboard. His face no longer held a trace of smugness, only confusion, disappointment, and profound shame. Ella suavemente colocó el lápiz abajo al lado de la pizarra y se volvió a enfrentar a la clase una vez más. For the first time in many years, she felt pride and relief fill her heart. In the unwavering look in her eyes at that moment, it was clear to everyone. Ella Robinson was no longer the submissive woman living in silence. She had broken the invisible chains of prejudice, standing strong with her intellect and courage. When Ella set the chalk down, an awed silence enveloped the classroom, as if time had stopped. But soon after, the quiet murmurs that had begun to spread widened, turning into uncontrollable chatter. The students who had once mocked Ella now seemed unable to believe what they had just witnessed with their own eyes. The looks that had once been full of prejudice and cruelty had completely changed. No longer were there sneers, no longer any subtle mockery. Instead, there was a sense of respect, astonishment, and a tinge of shame. A girl sitting in the middle row lowered her head, her voice full of regret, as she quietly said to the person next to her, "We were wrong. She really is a genius." The whisper grew louder as other students echoed their agreement. Many students glanced at Ella, their faces embarrassed for having judged someone based on appearance, profession, and skin color. The shame slowly became apparent on their faces, creating an atmosphere that was both tense and emotional. In the corner of the room, Mr. Carter stood frozen, unable to speak. He had never experienced the feeling of being defeated in front of the entire class. His usually arrogant face now showed only small, weak eyes full of embarrassment and bitterness. He had once used prejudice as a source of amusement, but now it was his own prejudice that had humiliated him most painfully. Ella stood silently before the blackboard, quietly observing the changes unfolding in the room. She didn't say anything, didn't smile, and didn't express any emotions too clearly. But deep within her heart was a powerful sense of pride, a great joy she hadn't been able to feel for the past 3 decades. In this moment, as she watched the faces of the young students before her change, Ella understood that she had just done something she never thought possible. She had broken down the invisible wall that had kept her separated from the outside world, forcing those who had once looked down on her to look at themselves with sincere remorse. The classroom was now filled with an entirely new atmosphere. No one dared to speak out loud, but they all knew that the most important lesson today wasn't on that blackboard. It was the lesson of respect, of judging others not by their appearance, occupation, or skin color. And the person teaching them this profound lesson was none other than the humble older woman they had once scorned. When the bell signaling the end of class rang, Ella quietly left the room and returned to her usual work. The hallway, now full of students, was bustling with activity, but today no one dared to look at her with mocking eyes. Instead, Ella encountered cautious, apologetic, and even respectful glances. She said nothing, simply walking on with a mood that was both relieved and complex. Later that afternoon, as Ella was gathering the last of her tools in the small cramped janitor's closet, a gentle knock on the door broke the usual silence of the space. Ella looked up, surprised to find that it was Mr. Carter standing at the door. His eyes no longer held the smugness or the usual cold arrogance. Instead, they were filled with hesitation and deep shame. "Ella, can I talk to you for a moment?" Carter asked quietly, his voice tinged with an unfamiliar shyness. Ella nodded gently, saying nothing more, and allowed him to enter the small room, which smelled of floor cleaner and bleach. The tight space only made the conversation feel more intense, but this time it was Carter who felt most uncomfortable. He looked around, then took a deep breath, trying to summon enough courage to face his biggest mistake. "Ella," Carter hesitated, calling her name for the first time with genuine respect. "I want to apologize for what happened this morning. I behaved disrespectfully, and I deeply regret it." Ella looked at him for a long moment, her gaze gentle but serious. She could feel the sincerity in Carter's words, but she knew this was also the time for her to voice the deepest emotions she had kept hidden for so many years, silently enduring them. "Mr. Carter," Ella spoke softly but with depth, "you know what you did today is not the first time I've experienced this. I've lived nearly my whole life in disdain and prejudice simply because of my skin color. But this time, it hurt more because it happened here, in a place I've worked for so long, where I thought I would at least receive some respect from others." Ella's voice trembled slightly, but she remained calm as she continued, her eyes tinged with sadness as she reflected on a long journey gone by. "Since I was a student, I had to give up my dream of becoming a mathematician because of cruel prejudices like this. I had to hide my intellect, accepting menial labor just to live in peace, away from the scrutinizing eyes of the world. Can you imagine the feeling of having to live in silence for decades just to avoid further pain? Carter remained silent, his head bowed. Each word from Ella felt like sharp needles piercing his heart. He realized that he, who always prided himself on his intellect and knowledge, had made the most serious mistake a teacher could make, looking down on and hurting someone based on their appearance and skin color. "I am truly sorry," Carter repeated, his voice now more sincere than ever. "I was wrong. I had no right to look down on you or anyone like that. Today, you taught me a lesson that I will probably never forget in my life." Ella sonrió suavemente, una sonrisa pequeña, pero increíblemente cálida. She felt her heart soften, as though a burden had been lifted after so many long years. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "I don't need your apology for myself, but I hope that after today, you will remember that a person's worth is not determined by their skin color, job, or status, but by their character, intelligence, and how they treat others." Carter looked up at Ella, his eyes now reflecting a completely new look, genuine respect mixed with admiration. He nodded firmly, as if making a silent promise to himself never to repeat this painful mistake again. And in that moment, in the small, cramped room, Ella felt a small but precious hope beginning to sprout. That today's story would open a new path where harsh prejudices would no longer have a place, at least not within this school. After the heartfelt conversation with Mr. Carter, Ella returned to her usual daily routine, cleaning and tending to every corner of Willowbrook High School. But what she didn't know was that within less than a day, the story of the elderly janitor who had defied prejudice and successfully solved the most difficult math problem in the advanced math class had spread throughout the school like an unstoppable wave. The news about Ella passed from one student to another, from classrooms to the cafeteria, and from the cafeteria to the sports field. The chatter, full of surprise and admiration, echoed constantly. "Have you heard about Mrs. Ella? It's unbelievable. She solved Mr. Carter's hardest problem in just a few minutes. I saw it with my own eyes. She went up to the board like a real math professor." Everyone was left speechless. Before long, the elderly black woman, who had spent her life living in the shadows and silence, had suddenly become the central figure spoken of with respect mixed with curiosity. The students who had once seen her as invisible now looked at her with admiration. Every time she passed by, quiet, respectful greetings became more frequent on their lips. Some students even dared to approach her, offering greetings, something that had never happened before. However, Ella remained unchanged. She continued to live her life simply and humbly, still focused on wiping down every desk, cleaning every window, and sweeping every hallway as though the story had never occurred. Her calm demeanor and humility only deepened the admiration that people had for her. On the other hand, for Mr. Carter, this story became a great mental shock, forcing him to confront his deepest prejudices. He spoke less and less, and every time he encountered Ella in the hallway, he would simply lower his head and greet her quietly, his eyes always reflecting regret and genuine respect. Though he didn't say much, it was clear to everyone that Carter had truly learned the most valuable lesson of his teaching career, the lesson of humility and respect. Within a week, Ella, once an anonymous woman who had silently lived in the shadows of racial and occupational prejudice, had become a living legend at Willowbrook High School. Her story was retold endlessly, a living symbol of resilience, courage, and the ability to overcome bias. The other teachers in the school began to realize their own mistakes, slowly changing their perceptions and how they treated her, and in a broader sense, how they treated everyone around them. Ella Robinson, the elderly black janitor, was no longer a silent, invisible figure. Instead, she became the clearest example of courage in the face of prejudice, a living testament to the fact that a person's intellect and dignity should never be measured by their job or the color of their skin. And while Ella had never sought fame, her humility and simplicity made her story all the more profound and moving. Her story didn't stop at the hallways or crowded classrooms. It quickly spread all the way to the office of Principal Richard Hayes, causing him to reflect deeply. As the head of Willowbrook High School for many years, he had always prided himself on fostering a civilized and progressive educational environment. But this time, Ella Robinson's story forced him to face the painful truth that even under his roof, racial discrimination and prejudice still existed, quietly but undeniably. Principal Hayes decided he could not remain passive. One late afternoon, when the school halls were quiet, he personally went to find Ella. He found her in the small storage room where she was quietly preparing her cleaning tools, as she did every day. Principal Hayes gently knocked on the ajar door, his expression full of concern but sincerity. "Hello, Mrs. Robinson. May I speak with you for a moment?" he asked softly. Ella turned around, surprised to see the principal coming to find her. She smiled and nodded gently. "Of course, Mr. Hayes. What would you like to talk to me about?" Principal Hayes entered the room, his eyes conflicted, but full of sincerity. He looked around at the cramped space filled with mops, water buckets, and cleaning bottles, all reflecting the long, quiet life of labor Ella had lived for so many years. He took a deep breath, then looked directly at Ella with clear sincerity. "I've heard about what happened in Mr. Carter's math class, and to be honest, I'm ashamed of it. I realized that our school still has many issues with underlying prejudice and discrimination that I should have noticed and dealt with much sooner." Ella listened silently, her gentle eyes fixed on him, waiting for what he would say next. "I didn't come here today just to apologize," Hayes continued, his voice sincere and serious. "I want to make this right in a more meaningful way. I'd like to offer you a position on the math teaching staff, part-time. I believe having you on the teaching team will help change people's perceptions, not only because of your extraordinary math skills, but also as a living example of a person's true worth beyond their job or skin color." Hearing Principal Hayes's offer, Ella was deeply moved. Her heart seemed to tighten, and for a moment, her memories and dreams from her younger years resurfaced more vividly than ever before. She had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, of standing at the front of a classroom, sharing her passion for math with students. But looking back on her life, she understood that she no longer needed a title or position to prove her worth. Ella sonrió suavemente, respondiendo con calma pero firme certeza. "Mr. Hayes, I truly appreciate your offer. It means a lot to me because in my youth, I dreamed of standing in front of a classroom. But now I realize something. My value doesn't depend on the job I do or the position I hold. I don't need a title for others to recognize my worth." She looked at the principal with bright, confident eyes. "What I truly hope for is that my story will help others understand that everyone deserves respect and fairness, no matter who they are, what job they have, or what their skin color is." Principal Hayes remained silent for a long time, absorbing the profound and powerful words of the woman standing before him. He nodded respectfully, realizing that he had just learned an important lesson in humility, self-respect, and true courage. "I understand, Mrs. Robinson. I completely respect your decision," he gently replied. "But please know that our doors are always open to you whenever you change your mind." Ella sonrió en silencio, sus ojos brillando con paz y orgullo. In that moment, she knew more than ever before that she had overcome every prejudice the world had placed upon her, not with a title or external recognition, but through her deep belief in her own worth. After the conversation with Principal Hayes, although Ella continued her simple janitorial work as usual, the atmosphere at Willowbrook High School began to change noticeably. Stories about Ella spread, seeping into the minds of every student and teacher, like small seeds quietly sprouting in each person's heart. They began to ask themselves whether they had unknowingly supported any subtle prejudices. In the classrooms, teachers no longer hesitated to discuss issues of racism and judging people based solely on appearance or occupation. Lively discussions were organized throughout the school, where students shared their honest thoughts about their experiences and perspectives. Issues they had previously avoided or unintentionally overlooked were now being discussed openly and deeply. At first, some students were still hesitant, skeptical, but over time, they became more engaged, inspired by the stories of their peers about how they had unknowingly offended or misjudged someone simply because of racial or occupational differences. These honest stories opened up opportunities for each person to reflect on themselves and acknowledge the seemingly harmless but deeply hurtful mistakes they had made. In these discussions, the name Ella Robinson was always mentioned with respect and gratitude. She, though humble and never actively involved in these public debates, had unknowingly become a living, powerful symbol of the fight against racism at Willowbrook. Students looked to her story as a great lesson in courage, resilience, and above all, the dignity of every person. Mr. Carter, who had once looked down on Ella the most, was now one of the most active teachers in promoting anti-racism programs at the school. He openly shared his own story about the mistake he had made and did not hesitate to admit in front of his class that it was Ella who had helped him realize the true value of respect and equality. Ella still lived quietly and simply, but whenever she appeared in the hallway or entered a classroom to do her work, the eyes that once had been cold or mocking had completely changed. Instead, there was sincere respect and sometimes gentle, friendly smiles. But she did not let these changes alter her. She understood that these shifts were not because of her, but because of the greater values she had unknowingly awakened in everyone's hearts. In her humility and simplicity, Ella had truly become a symbol, a quiet yet powerful symbol of justice, equality, and mutual respect. She didn't need to stand on a stage or make grand speeches before crowds. Her way of living and what she did every day was the clearest affirmation of a person's worth, a statement strong enough to erase prejudice and change hearts at Willowbrook High School. While Ella continued to live her quiet, ordinary days, the impact of her story spread beyond the walls of Willowbrook High School. Not only students and teachers, but also parents and the surrounding community began to take notice of the simple yet powerful janitor. They wanted to know more about her, to hear her tell the special story of her life. One weekend afternoon, as the sunlight began to fade, Principal Hayes once again sought out Ella, this time with a larger proposal. He found her after she had finished her daily tasks, still in the small storage room filled with familiar janitorial tools. "Hello, Mrs. Robinson," he spoke gently, his face full of sincerity and caution. "I'm afraid I'm bothering you again." Ella sonrió cálidamente, respondiendo con una mirada amable. "It's no trouble at all, Mr. Hayes. Is there something you need to talk to me about?" Hayes hesitated for a moment, then looked her in the eye, his voice serious yet persuasive. "Our school is about to host a major event, bringing together all the students, teachers, parents, and members of the community to discuss issues of racism and social equality. I would be deeply honored if you could join us and share your life story with everyone." Hearing this unexpected proposal, Ella felt a stirring in her heart. She had never imagined a day where she would stand before an audience, speaking about her private life or the hardships she had endured. The thought of becoming the center of attention was not something she desired. It made her feel anxious and hesitant. "I understand this is a big request," Hayes continued, seemingly reading the hesitation in Ella's eyes. "But your story has already changed many hearts and minds in this school. If you agree to share it once again, I believe it could do even more. It could help everyone in our community truly understand the biases that exist and give them the courage to change." Ella remained silent for a long while, her eyes drifting down to her calloused hands, shaped by years of labor. She understood the deeper meaning behind the principal's invitation and realized that this opportunity wasn't just for her, but for all those who had been treated unfairly, discriminated against, or looked down upon. Still, she felt a lingering reluctance and hesitation at the thought of stepping into the spotlight. "I'm really not sure if I can do this," Ella said softly, her voice sincere. "I've gotten used to living a quiet life, standing in the shadows for so long." "Mr. Hayes," Principal Hayes responded, his eyes gentle but full of encouragement, "I completely understand how you feel. But Mrs. Robinson, it is precisely your humility and simplicity that are your greatest strengths. No one expects you to be a perfect speaker. They just need to hear the truth from a woman who has bravely stood up against prejudice with strength and courage like you." Hearing these heartfelt words of encouragement, Ella gradually realized that deep down in her heart, she too longed for the chance to speak out about the things she had kept hidden for so many years. She wanted to change people's perceptions of racial prejudice, to leave behind something more meaningful than the small hallways of this school. She raised her head and looked at Principal Hayes. The hesitation in her eyes had diminished, replaced by determination and resolve. "Mr. Hayes, I will do it," Ella said softly, her voice strong yet gentle, true to her nature. "Not because I want to be the center of attention, but because I believe my story can help others see more clearly about themselves and change the way they treat each other." Principal Hayes smiled, relieved and grateful. In that moment, he realized that the woman standing before him was not just a janitor who had overcome prejudice. She was someone willing to use her life to help make the world a better, fairer place, even if it was something she had never expected or thought she could do. The day of the big event finally arrived. The Willowbrook High School auditorium was packed. Students, teachers, parents, and even members of the community filled the large space. The soft stage lights cast a warm glow, creating an atmosphere that was both formal and intimate. Everyone was eager to hear directly from the woman who had unintentionally become a symbol of resistance against racism in the community. As Ella slowly walked onto the stage, her heart pounded in her chest. She had never stood before such a large crowd, but as she looked down at the hundreds of faces staring up at her, the attentive and expectant eyes, she felt stronger. Ella took a deep breath and calmly began to tell the story of her life. "I am Ella Robinson," she began simply but powerfully. "Many of you may only know me as a janitor at this school, but I want to share with you that I once had a different dream. I once dreamed of becoming a mathematician when I was a young student at Harvard University. But that was a time when the dream of a black woman was not easily realized." Ella slowly and honestly recounted the times she had been rejected, ridiculed, and directly discriminated against because of her race and poor background. She didn't attempt to make the story more tragic, but the sincerity in every word she spoke caused the entire auditorium to gradually fall into complete silence. Everyone listened intently to every word, every emotion-filled sentence. "For more than 30 years, I lived quietly in silence," Ella continued. her eyes now shining with pride and strength. I accepted manual labor jobs and hid all my talents and intellect because I believed that the world would never accept me because of my skin color or my lowly job. But I was wrong. Ella's voice rang clear, strong, and filled with deep conviction. A person's talent, intellect, and worth are never determined by their skin color, job, or social status. What truly matters is dignity, self-respect, and how each of us treats one another. When Ella paused for a moment to take a breath, the entire auditorium remained still. No one dared to move or make even the slightest sound, as everyone felt their hearts stirring deeply in response to her honest, profound, and powerful words. I stand here today not to seek pity or kindness from anyone, Ella calmly asserted, her voice clear but deeply emotional. I stand here to remind you that each and every one of us deserves respect, that we all have inherent worth. Fairness should not be a privilege reserved for anyone. It must be a fundamental right that all of us can share equally. Ella paused again, looking directly at the crowd with eyes full of sincerity and warmth. Remember, only when we stop judging each other based on appearances, race, or occupation will we truly find mutual respect, and this world will become a better place. The auditorium fell silent after her final words. An atmosphere of deep emotion and reverence filled the room, and for a long time, no one wanted to break that sacred silence. Silent tears fell on many faces, for Ella had not just shared her personal story. She had conveyed a powerful message about the true value of each person. As the final applause in the auditorium gradually faded, Ella gently stepped off the stage, returning to the familiar quiet space behind the curtains. The moments she had just experienced lingered strongly in her mind, but Ella didn't feel overwhelmed or uneasy, as she had feared. On the contrary, she felt an unprecedented sense of relief and peace, as though she had just laid down a burden she had carried her whole life. The next day, Ella returned to her simple janitorial work, just as she had done for over 30 years. The familiar small room still smelled of bleach, and the sound of running water still tinkled in the background, but this time everything seemed lighter and more pleasant. As she walked through the long hallways with her mop in hand, the students who passed by no longer turned their faces away or pretended not to see her. Instead, they lowered their heads to greet her, politely and sincerely, and gentle smiles and words of thanks had become a familiar part of her daily routine. What Ella realized most wasn't the respect or admiration from others. It was the change within her own soul. Now when she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she no longer saw a woman who had been resigned and silent, but a strong, confident woman worthy of respect. She understood that through her own actions, she had broken the wall of prejudice that society had built around her. The self-worth she had once doubted was now clearer and more certain than ever. Mr. Carter, once a symbol of arrogance and prejudice, now greeted Ella with a respectful nod every time they crossed paths, his attitude sincere and filled with deep respect. Each nod was a clear reminder that Ella had truly changed the way an entire generation saw her, starting with the person who had once looked down on her the most. In the quietest moments, when she was alone in the small room at the end of the hallway, Ella would often smile softly. It was a smile of serenity, contentment, and a quiet joy that no praise or fame could ever bring. She knew now that the true value of herself no longer needed anyone else to confirm it. She had earned the respect she had once longed for from others through her own courage, perseverance, and dignity. From that day forward, Ella Robinson continued to do her janitorial work as she had before, but she was no longer a woman confined by her job, her skin color, or the prejudiced gazes of others. Instead, She had become a woman, completely free. Free because she had truly found peace within herself, content with her current life, and most importantly, because she had discovered her own worth and the sincere respect from herself. The days passed gently, like a quiet stream, and Ella continued her janitorial work with the same humility she had always had. However, the Willowbrook High School she had dedicated nearly half her life to had changed forever. No longer a place that held silent prejudices, it was now a place filled with a new spirit, the spirit of inclusiveness, equality, and mutual respect. Ella Robinson's story was no longer just a memory or a single event. It had become a vivid, powerful symbol of inner strength, self-respect, and the courage to overcome unjust prejudices. Her name was now a constant reminder to all students, teachers, and the community that a person's value should never be limited by their skin color, status, or the work they do. At Willowbrook, the anti-racism education programs were no longer just symbolic. They had become an essential part of everyday activities. Regular workshops and discussions about social justice were held, attracting active and enthusiastic participation from students. Even those who had once been indifferent or opposed began to change their thinking, feeling the power of the message that Ella's story brought. Mr. Carter, who had once unintentionally embodied prejudice, had now become one of the most active teachers in promoting the elimination of all discrimination at the school. He organized meetings and conversations, helping students recognize the mistakes he had made and showing them that everyone can make mistakes. But what matters is the ability to correct them and change. In the community surrounding Willowbrook High School, the impact of Ella's story spread powerfully. Other schools began to take notice, learning from and adopting the equality programs that Willowbrook was implementing. Ella's image, that of the humble elderly black janitor with dignity, became a familiar symbol at many educational and community events, reminding everyone of the deep value of compassion and respect. But Ella didn't care much about external fame or glory. What truly mattered to her were the changes she had helped bring about for the younger generation. She rejoiced to see students growing up with a new awareness, no longer influenced by the wrong prejudices that previous generations had unintentionally passed down. For Ella, the greatest legacy she left was not fame or recognition. It was her deep belief in positive change, the power of courage, perseverance, and human dignity. She understood that even if one day she no longer walked the halls of Willowbrook High School, her story would forever serve as a profound and meaningful reminder of equality and self-respect for anyone who heard it. Ella Robinson, the elderly black janitor, had forever become an immortal symbol, not because of anything grand or distant, but because of her sincerity, humility, and extraordinary inner strength that helped her break through all the invisible barriers of prejudice in the hearts of everyone at Willowbrook. Her image would always be a shining symbol of the right to live in respect, equality, and love, those most noble values that every person deserves. Ella Robinson's story is a powerful reminder that a person's true worth is not found in appearance, job, or skin color, but in inner strength, courage, and self-respect. Prejudice not only hurts a person, but also robs society of the chance to see the wonderful things that every individual can bring.